I'm continuing a sermon series here that we have under the name of Quiet Ambition. And I'll give you a quick recap of where we've been up till now. So this is a study through the books of Ruth and the book of Esther. So going back a few weeks, we've had messages, one titled Remarkable Love, about the concept of hesed, love, a steadfast loyalty in the book of Ruth, ambition of margin, accepting limitations and trusting God, ambition of integrity, and seeing the redemption of Ruth as a model for Jesus as our Redeemer, an ambition of legacy, and John Rittner last week talking about particularly the idea of inclusion and hospitality as markers of God's people. And today, the title of my message is Ambition of Position. What does it mean to be faithfully ambitious where we are or happen to be? And I'm going to put ambition sort of goes in air quotes here of what even does ambition mean when you're in a circumstance that you didn't put yourself into, you didn't choose for yourself. So I'm going to pray, and then I'm going to read about half of the book of Esther. So there's a bit of reading here, but I think it's helpful because it's all about particular characters in a particular story and understanding how some of this stuff's coming together. So we're going to read through it and then continue on from there. So right now, please pray with me. Lord God, thank you for this morning and this opportunity to sit together as your people, to be together, to study your word, and thank you for the Holy Spirit. And I pray, Lord, that you would send the Holy Spirit to touch our hearts, to reveal your word to us today, to challenge us, lead us, and build us up as your people for your glory. Amen. All right. The book of Esther, chapter 1. This is the story of something that happened in the time of Xerxes, the Xerxes who ruled from India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces in all. So India, Southern Asia, all the way to Ethiopia, Eastern Africa. Big kingdom. King Xerxes ruled from his royal throne in the palace complex of Susa. In the third year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all his officials and ministers. The military brass of Persia and Media were also there, along with the princes and governors of the provinces. For 6 months, he put on exhibit the huge wealth of his empire and its stunningly beautiful royal splendors. At the conclusion of the exhibit, the king threw a week-long party for everyone living in Susa, the capital, important and unimportant alike. The party was in the garden courtyard of the king's summer house. The courtyard was elaborately decorated with white and blue cotton curtains tied with linen and purple cords to silver rings on marble columns. Silver and gold couches were arranged in mosaic pavements of porphyry marble, mother of pearl, and colored stones. Drinks were served in gold chalices, each chalice one of a kind. The royal wine flowed freely. A generous king. The guests could drink as much as they liked. King's orders, with waiters at their elbows to refill the drinks. Meanwhile, Queen Vashti was throwing a separate party for women inside King Xerxes' royal palace. On the 7th day of the party, the king, high on wine, ordered the 7 eunuchs who were his personal servants to bring him Queen Vashti, resplendent in her royal crown. He wanted to show off her beauty to the guests and officials. She was extremely good-looking. But Queen Vashti refused to come, refused the summons delivered by the eunuchs. The king lost his temper, seething with anger over her insolence. The king called in his counselors, all experts in legal matters. It was the king's practice to consult his expert advisors, those closest to him, 7 high-ranking princes of Persia and Media, the inner circle with access to the king's ear. He asked them what legal recourse they had against Queen Vashti for not obeying King Xerxes' summons delivered by the eunuchs. One of them, named Memucan, spoke up in the council of the king and princes. It is not only the king Queen Vashti has insulted, it's all of us. Leaders and people alike in every last one of King Xerxes' provinces. The word's going to get out. Did you hear the latest about Queen Vashti? King Xerxes ordered her to be brought before him and she wouldn't do it. When the women hear it, they'll start treating their husbands with contempt. The day the wives of the Persian and Mede officials get wind of the queen's brazenness, they'll be out of control. Lost my place. So outraged. Is that what we want? A country of angry women who don't know their place. So, if the king agrees, let him pronounce a royal ruling and have it recorded in the laws of the Persians and Medes so that it cannot be revoked, that Vashti is permanently banned from King Xerxes' presence. And then let the king give her royal position to a woman who knows her place. When the king's ruling becomes public knowledge throughout the kingdom, extensive as it is, every woman, regardless of her social position, will show proper respect to her husband. The king and the princes liked this. Not surprised, but the king did what Memucan proposed. He sent bulletins to every part of the kingdom, to each province in its own script, to every people in their own language. Every man is the master of his own house. Whatever he says goes. Later, when King Xerxes' anger had cooled and he was having second thoughts about what Vashti had done and what he had ordered against her, the king's young attendants stepped in and got the ball rolling. Let's begin a search for beautiful young virgins for the king. Let the king appoint officials in every province of his kingdom to bring every beautiful young virgin to the palace complex of Susa and to the harem run by Hegai, the king's eunuch, who oversees the women. He will put them through their beauty treatments. Then let the girl who best pleases the king be made queen in place of Vashti. The king liked this advice and took it. All right, so there's kind of a scene break here, but we've had an introduction to King Xerxes here. He's a bit hot-headed, he's rash, he does things and regrets them afterwards. He's extremely self-serving. He's got people around him who are quite happy to suggest things that are very much to his interest, particularly. We continue. Now there was a Jew who lived in the palace complex in Susa. His name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjaminite. His ancestors had been taken from Jerusalem with the exiles and carried off with King Jehoiakim of Judah by King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon into exile. People taken from their home and living away under duress. Mordecai had raised his cousin Hadassah, otherwise known as Esther, since she had no father or mother. The girl had a good figure and a beautiful face. After her parents died, Mordecai had adopted her. When the king's order had been publicly posted, many young girls were brought to the palace complex of Susa and given over to Hegai, who was overseer of the women. Esther was among them. Hegai liked Esther and took a special interest in her. Right off, he started her beauty treatments, ordered special food, assigned her 7 personal maids from the palace, and put her and her maids in the best rooms in the harem. Esther didn't say anything about her family and racial background because Mordecai had told her not to. Every day, Mordecai strolled beside the court of the harem to find out how Esther was and get news of what she was doing. Each girl's turn came to go in to King Xerxes after she had completed the 12 months of prescribed beauty treatments. 6 months treatment with oil of myrrh, followed by 6 months with perfumes and various cosmetics. When it was time for the girl to go to the king, she was given whatever she wanted to take with her when she left the harem for the king's quarters. She would go there in the evening. In the morning, she would return to a second harem overseen by Shazgaz, the king's eunuch in charge of the concubines. And it's clear there's a change here from being someone in the harem, the first harem, which is women in the king's household, and the concubines in the second harem being the sexual partners of the king. She never again went back to the king unless the king took a special liking to her and asked for her by name. When it was Esther's turn to go to the king, Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had adopted her as his daughter, she asked for nothing other than what Hegai, the king's eunuch in charge of the harem, had recommended. Esther, just as she was, won the admiration of everyone who saw her. She was taken to King Xerxes in the royal palace in the 10th month, the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of the king's reign. The king fell in love with Esther far more than with any of the other women or of the other virgins. He was totally smitten by her. He placed a royal crown on her head and made her queen in place of Vashti. Then the king gave a great banquet for all his nobles and officials, Esther's banquet. He proclaimed a holiday for all the provinces and handed out gifts with royal generosity. So we have our introduction to Mordecai and to Esther and their entrance into the circle of the king here in this way. On one of the occasions where the virgins were being gathered together, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. All this time, Esther had kept her family background and race a secret as Mordecai had ordered. Esther still did what Mordecai told her, just as when she was being raised by him. On this day, with Mordecai sitting at the king's gate, Bigtana and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs who guarded the entrance, had it in for the king and were making plans to kill King Xerxes. But Mordecai learned of the plot and told Queen Esther, who then told King Xerxes, giving credit to Mordecai. When the thing was investigated and confirmed as true, the two men were hanged on a gallows. This was all written down in a logbook kept for the king's use. This is a note along the way. It's sort of relevant for later in the story, but reveals something about Mordecai's character, about Esther's character, and again, a connection between all these parties with the king particularly. And we go into chapter 3 now, where we introduce the other significant figure in this story. Sometime later, King Xerxes promoted Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, making him the highest-ranking official in the government. All the king's servants at the king's gate used to honor him by bowing down and kneeling before Haman. That's what the king had commanded. Except Mordecai. Mordecai wouldn't do it, wouldn't bow down and kneel. The king's servants at the king's gate asked Mordecai about it. Why do you cross the king's command? Day after day, they spoke to him about this, but he wouldn't listen. So they went to Haman to see whether something should be done about it. Mordecai had told them that he was a Jew. When Haman saw for himself that Mordecai didn't bow down and kneel before him, he was outraged. Meanwhile, having learned that Mordecai was a Jew, Haman hated to waste his fury on just one Jew. He looked for a way to eliminate not just Mordecai, but all Jews throughout the whole kingdom of Xerxes. In the first month, the month of Nisan, of the 12th year of Xerxes, the pur, that is, the lot, was cast under Haman's charge to determine the propitious day and month. The lot turned up the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. Haman then spoke with King Xerxes. There is an odd set of people scattered throughout the provinces of your kingdom who don't fit in. Their customs and ways are different from those of everybody else. Worse, they disregard the king's laws. They're an affront. The king shouldn't put up with them. If it please the king, let orders be given that they be destroyed. I'll pay for it myself. I'll deposit 375 tons of silver in the royal bank to finance the operation. The king slipped his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman, son of Hammedatha the Agagite, arch-enemy of the Jews. Go ahead, the king said to Haman. It's your money. Do whatever you want with those people. The king's secretaries were brought in on the 13th day of the first month. The orders were written out word for word as Haman had addressed them to the king's satraps, the governors of every province, and the officials of every people. They were written in the script of each province and the language of each people in the name of King Xerxes and sealed with the royal signet ring. Bulletins were sent out by couriers to all the king's provinces with orders to massacre, kill, and eliminate all the Jews, youngsters and old men, women and babies, on a single day, the 13th day of the 12th month, the month Adar, and to plunder their goods. Copies of the bulletin were to be posted in each province, publicly available to all peoples to get them ready for that day. At the king's command, the couriers took off. The order was also posted in the palace complex of Susa. The king and Haman sat back and had a drink, while the city of Susa reeled from the news. So there's a significant time frame thing here. I just want to make sure you caught that. This is happening in the first month of the year, and it's scheduled for the 12th month of the year, right? So there's a time of build-up, there's a time of communication, but there's also a time of reaction and, response. And so we continue into chapter 4. When Mordecai learned what had been done, he ripped his clothes to shreds, put on sackcloth and ashes. Then he went out in the streets of the city, crying out in loud and bitter voice. He came only as far as the king's gate, for no one dressed in sackcloth was allowed to enter the king's gate. As the king's order was posted in every province, there was loud lament among the Jews, fasting, weeping, wailing, and most of them stretched out on sackcloth and ashes. Esther's maids and eunuchs came and told her. The queen was stunned. She sent fresh clothes to Mordecai so he could take off his sackcloth, but he wouldn't accept them. Esther called for Hatak, one of the royal eunuchs who the king had assigned to wait on her, and told him to go to Mordecai and get the full story of what was happening. So Hatak went to Mordecai in the town square in front of the king's gate. Mordecai told him everything that had happened to him. He also told him the exact amount of money that Haman had promised to deposit in the royal bank to finance the massacre of the Jews. Mordecai also gave him a copy of the bulletin that had been posted in Susa ordering the massacre, so he could show it to Esther when he reported back with instructions to go to the king and intercede and plead with him for her people. Hatak came back and told Esther everything Mordecai had said. Esther talked it over with Hatak and then sent him back to Mordecai with this message. Hatak's going back and forth, taking messages between the two of them. So this message for Mordecai. Everyone who works for the king here, and even the people out in the provinces, knows that there's a single fate for every man or woman who approaches the king without being invited. It's death. The one exception is if the king extends his gold scepter, then he or she may live. And it's been 30 days now since I've been invited to come to the king. When Hatak told Mordecai what Esther had said, Mordecai sent her this message. Don't think that just because you live in the king's house, you're the one Jew who will get out of this alive. If you persist in staying silent at a time like this, help and deliverance will arrive for the Jews from someplace else, but you and your family will be wiped out. Who knows? Maybe you were made queen for just such a time as this. Esther sent back her answer to Mordecai. Go and get all the Jews living in Susa together. Fast for me. Don't eat or drink for 3 days, either day or night. I and my maids will fast with you. If you do this, I'll go to the king, even though it's forbidden. If I die, I die. Mordecai left and carried out Esther's instructions. All right, so that's where we're going to stop in Esther today. You can read on. You may already know where the story goes here, but that's where we'll stop today. So, significant characters, right? You have the king, you have Mordecai, you have Esther, we have Haman, right? These significant figures in this story. And I'm going to set all that aside for a moment. We're going to do something else for a minute and keep that in the back of our minds. So I have a very different direction here, a question for each of us to think about. I want us to reflect back on where we are and how we got here. So the first question is, where were you 5 years ago? 2021. Maybe end of lockdown-ish kind of stuff. Maybe not a great time. So some of this remembering back may not be all happy memories. I accept that. Maybe some happy memories amongst things. We'll keep going and see what comes to mind. So 5 years ago, where were you? What were you doing? Where were you working? What was your family situation? What was going on? How about 10 years ago? 2016. Trying to remember 2016. Where was I working? I can probably, where was I living? I can put that together, right? 2016. What about 10 years before that? 20 years ago. 2006. So that was, I said, I've been in Burbank for 15 years now. So that was before we moved here. So back in Tasmania, part of Australia, 20 years ago. Of the 3 children I have, we only had one of them at that point, 20 years ago. I think that, no, I'm miscounting. Okay, my wife is nodding. All right. 2006. Okay, the end of 2006, yes. Yeah. All right, go back another 10 years. 1996. What was going on in the... Okay, so some of you have probably passed the point where you have your own memories of this time. So, for the sake of the exercise, in 1996, what was going on in the world? Can you think of anything that was going on in the world in 96? Where were your parents? What relevant to your existence and journey was happening at that point? Go back another 10 years, 1986. I was still around. And let's see, 1980s. We've gone back. So if like the early parts of this process, you probably could have looked at your phone or photo history and such and seen exactly what was going on. We're well into no phones with cameras at this point to work with. 1986. All right, go back further. 1976. So it's before my time. What was going on? Where were your parents? Were they married? What about your grandparents? 1966? What was going on in the world back then? Some of you were there, I'm sure. We can keep going back, right? We can keep going back. All of us has a story that keeps going back because we come from, our parents, our grandparents. One of the things this morning, so I'm standing here with this. We don't normally have this particular stand here for the preacher. I learned about it this morning. It's got a little plaque on here that says "Made in 1933," which, that's pretty cool. What was going on in the world in 1933? It was a long time ago, but my parents weren't there. My grandparents were, though. There was some pretty significant stuff. So 2 of my grandparents moved from Europe to Australia after World War II, so that was in the 1940s. But right, they were living in Europe in 1933. They were young. It's a long time ago. But we can think back, right? All of us has a story that goes back decades. Well, not all of us has a story that goes back decades, personally. But we come from a story that goes back and back. And if we think back to when you were a teenager. So wherever that is in the decades or recent past, think back to when you're a teenager, and think to where you are now. And if you were to tell your teenage self what's happened in your life since you were there, would you believe it? Now, can see a few people. That's not maybe so long ago. Think about maybe where the future might be for you, right? Imagine what could possibly happen and then say, but it's also likely to be something completely different that I can't predict. I don't know what's coming, right? If I had told myself that I'd be standing here in California as a teenager, a few years ago, I worked for Walt Disney Animation for a little bit. If I had have told myself that, it just wouldn't have made sense. Like, how? Why? What? Why would that happen? And yet, here I am this morning doing this. Think back through your life and think about some of the things you've done along the way. Right, go back to when you were a teenager, short or long time ago. Think about something good you did as a teenager. Right? Did you do a good thing as a teenager? One of the memories for me that comes back. So when I was in grade school, in equivalent of elementary, my family moved around the state quite a bit. I was often going to a new school. I was often the kind of the odd one out. Still, keep it weird. But I remember having that experience, right? Being the newcomer at a school, not really knowing anyone, feeling on the outside. And then in high school, I was in the one school for a few years. And there was a point where partway through the year, a new kid came to the school, and I remember seeing him during the lunch break, sitting by himself, and I feel like it was a good thing I did. Went over and sat down with him and talked to him, and we ended up becoming really good friends. And it was a wonderful thing that came out of that. There we go. There's something I did as a teenager that I think was all right. But go forward 10 years, right? Can you think of one thing in the next decade that you did was good? I believe in us. One good thing per decade. I'm sure we can come up with that, right? The decade after that. The decade after that. The decade after that, right? Imagine the future. Can you imagine doing good things? I'm sure you can. And this is, all right, all of us have this story. All of us have the things we have done along the way, good and bad, right? We've made decisions with consequences, all sorts of things. I'm sure there's some amazing stories in this room. I'm not going to ask anyone to jump up and tell them. It's okay. But we have stories that involve our decisions. We have stories that involve not our decisions, right? We didn't choose when we were born. We didn't choose which of these decades we were born in. We didn't choose who our parents were. We didn't choose where we were born, right? These things, we didn't choose how we were going to look fundamentally. These things, there's a lot in our lives that are out of our direct control. So, I'm going to go back to the characters in this story. Think about the sorts of things they're capable of and the sorts of consequences that have come from their decisions. So we can look at the king, right? The king of Persia, this huge nation that spans continents. He makes decisions. He can set laws. He can decide how this society will function. And yet, this story opens with, he summons his wife and she says no. And there is something in this world that is out of his control. And he doesn't cope with it, right? He gets angry and reacts out of that anger. Later on, he's sitting down with Haman. Haman comes in and says, hey, I want to kill this entire people group. And the king's like, well, I mean, I'll take the money, sure. Not realizing that this queen of his, that he's kind of fond of, is a member of that group, right? One of the most powerful men in the world doesn't understand remotely how deeply he's hurting his own selfish interests in all this situation. Being the king doesn't guarantee you perfect knowledge. We take Haman. Haman is rich and prominent and powerful and also really wants Mordecai to bow down to him, right? He's got that kind of insecurity and vengeance. And I'm going to give a spoiler on this one. This doesn't work out well for Haman in the end. He has this immense view of himself, and in the end, so he ends up setting up a gallows at which to hang Mordecai, and in the end, he gets hung on. He makes decisions, and his actions lead to an outcome that results in his own death. You can have all the money, all the influence, all the power, and still not know what the consequences of your actions are going to be. Mordecai is an exile, taken from his country. He has a cousin, a young cousin, who has no parents, and he chooses to adopt her, to take care of her. He makes this choice. And one of the consequences of that for him is that he ends up having the ear of the queen of the empire. So he works in the palace, but he's not the king, he's not the queen, he's not one of the biggest figures. He doesn't have the wealth of Haman. But his choices and actions lead to a situation where he has influence in terms of seeking to protect the well-being of his people. And so at no point, I think it's fair to say, at no point would Mordecai have imagined when he adopted Esther that he would be an influencer of the queen of the empire, right? It's not something he would have thought, yes, I can adopt this person and there's a benefit, down the road here. We can save ourselves, right? There's not that kind of awareness of the future. And likewise, Esther. She didn't choose her appearance. She didn't choose her circumstances. She didn't choose to be exiled. She didn't choose to be taken in forcefully into servitude of the king here. And so she is in a position of having to make a choice. She is in a position of how is she going to respond to this situation. So she's the queen, and the queen is absolutely positioned with privilege, right? She's not worried about where her food's coming from. She's not worrying about where the fine clothes are coming from. But she also has restricted freedom, right? It's not a one-sided thing. There's no running away from this. You don't just get to, leave the king of Persia because you don't want to be there. And so when when Mordecai writes to her and says, you won't be protected from this, I think I read it and my reaction is a little harsh in terms of how he frames it, but there's a real sense of which she doesn't have the freedom even to run away. She is targeted by this order. The consequences will come for her, and she can't escape it. And so she has a choice in this moment to say, I will risk my personal well-being now for the sake of the good of my people, myself and my people. And that doesn't make it not a scary prospect, right? Doing the good thing, doing the right thing, doing the best thing is rarely an easy decision to make. It rarely comes at no cost. So Jay earlier read during our worship time earlier, and some of the words in there from Jesus are, if you try to gain your life, you will lose it. There's a distinct connection of idea here, right? So, Esther is asked to speak up, to risk her life for the good of her people. And she says she'll do it. And she asks for support in that, right? Fast with me. Be purposeful in supporting me as best you can from a distance, right? She's in the king's household. Mordecai and the other Jews are not, right? They can't get alongside one another directly. She's sending this guy Hathach back and forth, passing messages between the two of them. The idea that you can be supported by people at a distance is very real, right? And the act of fasting as a spiritual discipline, as a choice to say, I'm going to let the needs of my body go wanting for a time, to draw my attention to the bigger issue, the need for God to act in this. And we're going to focus our attention on that spiritual pursuit. So for us, what's the takeaway here, I guess? What does this mean? Where does this lead us as individuals? And I would say, like the characters in this story, we didn't decide how we got to where we are, right? Like I said, we didn't decide where we were born or when we were born or to whom we were born, anything like that. We didn't decide how we were going to look. We have some influence, once you've got some consciousness, a little bit of agency, right? You make choices that affect your path, but ultimately, right, you can be the king of the Persian Empire and still make bad decisions. You can be extremely rich and still make bad decisions that lead to your own death, right? There's no assurance we have that we don't have perfect knowledge of the future. And so what we need to do, and particularly as followers of Jesus Christ, as members of God's kingdom, as people who are invited into that work, the calling on us is to trust God and act faithfully. And this is where we get to this ambition of position, right? If our position is wherever we happen to be, whether we've been made the queen of a nation, which I don't think any of us have, or whatever our circumstances are, what is incumbent upon us is to make the choices that have the priorities of the kingdom that we're part of. If we are followers of Jesus Christ, that's the calling on us. I'm going to read from the letter to the Philippians. This is something that was written hundreds of years later. But Paul writes to the church in Philippi, if you've gotten anything at all out of following Christ, if his love has made any difference in your life, if being in a community of the Spirit means anything to you, if you have a heart, if you care, then do me a favor. Agree with each other. Love each other. Be deep-spirited friends. Don't push your way to the front. Don't sweet-talk your way to the top. Put yourself aside. Help others get ahead. Don't be obsessed with getting your own advantage. Forget yourselves long enough to lend a helping hand. This is the calling for us. With what we have, right, which may be a lot and which may be very little, we are called to forget ourselves long enough to lend a helping hand, right? And that can be, if you have the capacity, right, that can be giving of what you have and sharing it with others. That can be prayer. That can be fasting. That can be encouragement. Whatever you have, whether very little or a lot, the call upon us is to give of that for the good of others. Think of yourselves the way Christ Jesus thought of himself. He had equal status with God, but didn't think so much of himself that he had to cling to the advantages of that status, no matter what. Not at all. When the time came, he set aside the privileges of deity and took the status of a slave. He became human. Having become human, he stayed human. It was an incredible, humbling process. He didn't claim special privileges. Instead, he lived a selfless, obedient life and then died a selfless, obedient death. And the worst kind of death at that, a crucifixion. Because of that obedience, God lifted him high and honored him far beyond anyone or anything ever, so that all created beings in heaven and on earth, and even those long ago dead and buried, will bow down in worship before this Jesus Christ and call out in praise that he is the master of all, to the glorious honor of God the Father. Be energetic, skipping forward just a little bit, be energetic in your life of salvation, reverent and sensitive before God. So this this call to be like Jesus Christ is what we have as followers of Christ, as members of his kingdom, as sharers of his purpose. And to go back to Esther, this is ultimately what the sort of thing she chose, faithfulness in her circumstances. So if the worship team would like to come up, I'm nearly finished. So again, we don't have control over how we got to where we are. We don't have perfect knowledge about what's coming in our future, the consequences of our choices. We can certainly make choices that are more likely to have, predictable outcomes, but we don't have control over that. There is always unknowns there. There is always things outside of our control, no matter how powerful we are. But what we do have as followers of Jesus Christ is, what was this term? In a community of the Spirit. We are part of a family that is marked by God's love for us. That whatever the outcome, he doesn't abandon us. And in fact, the opposite. He is faithful, right? Spoilers for the Esther story. Esther is faithful, and God meets her, and the things work out well for the Jewish people. There is when we are faithful, God is faithful, and we can trust him in that. And it won't always work out the way we expect. It won't always be something that's under our control as a thing we can do. But it is something that's true, to know that we are not abandoned, we are not forsaken, we are not left alone. We are part of a family and with a God who cares for us and has our good in mind. So with that, I want to invite you to reflect on where you have felt the Spirit speaking to you today. Have you felt challenged as you remembered back? One of the things I found in thinking back over my life and where I've been and what I've done and that sort of thing is there are things I've done in the past that I miss. I kind of wish I could do some of those things again, and not all of them are available to me because I'm in a different stage of life. And there's things that I haven't done that I do still want to be able to do, and I aspire to. I know I don't have control about where everything's going to go, but in all of this, I guess I have found reassurance in knowing that God loves me and He is at work, like regardless of my best efforts and how limited they are. He is at work, and I can trust Him. And I know that it's going to be okay. And I know that I'm not going to be abandoned in this. And I know that I have family that includes and is so much more than my own earthly family. And so there is hope. And so, yes, let's reflect, remember, imagine, hope, and let the Spirit speak to us as to where we are and where we might be going.